how realistic is it to expect the Fed's going to pull the trigger that soon?
At 22% right now, that's a 78% chance they don't move. No, it's not very realistic that they would move in July. But as you pointed out, the payroll report is on Thursday. The 15th of July is the CPI report. If one or both of those shows weakness, we could put the July report into play. There's also politics on the Fed, too. And that is in the form of Michelle Bowman and Chris Waller, two Trump appointees. Chris Waller is, in the betting markets, leading to be the replacement for Jay Powell. On Friday, President Trump said that he will only nominate somebody who wants to cut interest rates. Well, Chris Waller better make the case and better dissent in July if the Fed doesn't cut rates. Otherwise, he's effectively removing his name from the consideration to be the replacement to Jay Powell. So if we get a weak number and combined with that politics, there is a scenario where you could put July into play. Right now, it doesn't look likely, but we'll have to see what the data says at the end of the week.
You mentioned Waller and you mentioned Bowman, right? Both of them, if I'm not mistaken, were appointed by President Trump during his first term. Certainly, Michelle Bowman was. I can't remember whether or not Chris Waller was, but it sounds as though we have the makings potentially of a mutiny at the Fed. Is that a stretch?
No, it's not a stretch at all. Chris Waller was appointed in December 2020, right at the end of the Trump's first term. And that has been the thing that I think is going to surprise the Fed. The Fed has been saying that they're unified, that they're committed to their goal of price stability and employment as high as possible. But I don't think it ever occurred to them that the dissent or the friction would come from within on one of their members looking to replace Jay Powell, but having to curry favor with the president by pushing this agenda of immediately cutting rates right now and maybe even getting a test trial as early as July to show his commitment to cutting rates. Because if he doesn't, like I said, if he doesn't show that commitment, then I think he removes his name from the table. So the Fed's going to have to deal with this from an internal basis. It would have been different if the leader and maybe President Trump does pick somebody from the outside, because they're not on the board now. They can only yell from the outside until May of 2026 when Jay Powell's term is over, but they can't really affect the committee from the inside like a Bowman or a Chris Waller can.
Yeah, so I was going to ask you, right, whether it really makes any difference whether the nominee is from inside or outside. But if it were to be from inside, let's say Waller or Bowman, right, it could potentially make the market even more confused, right? It's like, Powell is still there. He's only going to be there for another couple of months until May when his term runs out. But these two guys are sitting in the same room with him. Who do we listen to?
Exactly right. In 15th century Europe, they had two popes, and it didn't work out very well for them. And if we have two Federal Reserve chairmen sitting in the same room with one coming in and the other going out, you're right. You could see a scenario where, Chairman Powell holds his quarterly press conference, makes a bunch of statements and a bunch of outlooks and tries to lay out the course for Fed policy. And then if it is Chris Waller, just to use that name for an example, he holds a press conference an hour later and lays out a completely different course of how he would react come May. And then the market doesn't know what to think. Do we listen to the guy that's in charge? Do we listen to the guy who's about to become in charge? Which way do we wind up going with this? And that there's a lot of dissent and chaos and confusion. And so that could potentially be an issue as we go forward. And remember, President Trump is committed to naming his successor very soon. Even though Jay Powell's term ends in May of 2026, he could, in theory, nominate that successor in the spring of next year. They're making it sound like we could hear a name as early as September. So we would have many, many months where we would effectively have two Federal Reserve chairmen.